Good morning, everyone. This is Michelle Hughes from Ageless and Timeless. Today, I have Dr. Adam Perlman as my guest, and I love the fact that I've been able to meet Dr. Perlman, or Adam. I'm going to call him if he doesn't mind, but I'm going to just say that, very often I have guests on that I've never met, but we talk on the phone. But with Dr. Perlman, because the company he's with, which is called Pendulum Therapeutics, is based in San Francisco, although he resides in Jacksonville, Florida, but he comes here frequently. So we were able to actually meet in person, had a lovely dinner. And good morning or good afternoon for you, Dr. Perlman or Adam.
Great to see you again.
So happy to have you. Yeah, we had a really healthy dinner although I have to admit, I noticed that he can cheat a little bit, but that's okay. Look at how good he looks. And I know. But we both come from Massachusetts, from Boston area, and although neither one of us are living there now, we both know that that's our base, our home roots. And fortunately for both of us, we don't have Boston accents, right, Adam?
Only when I go to park my car at a party.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no.
People have said to me I don't drink very much, but every once in a while, if I have a glass of wine or something, that's when it will come back. So I guess it's still in our DNA, but fortunately we've been away long enough, even though you go back for your summers and I often go back for family, but at least we sound like we're from other parts of the world, of the country. Well, anyway, I'm so happy to have you. Let me tell everybody who you are, and then I'm going to let you take over. So I just want to say about Adam that he is way ahead of his time. And I say that because, he worked at both the Mayo Clinic and Duke, and he actually worked in New Jersey for a little bit. It was called Health Systems, the company in New Jersey, Adam.
Oh, well, I was at St. Barnabas, that health system, and then moved most of my time over to what was UMDNJ. It's now Rutgers. So I kind of split my time in New Jersey before I went to Duke in 2011.
Right, and he has all his degrees from Tufts and from Boston University, so that is consistent with where he grew up. But anyway, when I say he's ahead of his time, so he started early on at Rutgers, as he said. Then he went to the Mayo Clinic. And then did you go to Mayo Clinic first and then Duke?
Duke first, yes, Duke.
So he was in Duke and then the Mayo Clinic. And all three of those places, he was way ahead of his time because he was working in functional and integrative medicine way before they became the kind of mainstream that they are today. So what was it, Adam, that got you so aware of and interested in focusing on an area of medicine that you certainly were not studying in the early days of your medical education? So
Yeah, sure.
what was it that led you to become an integrative medicine doctor?
Sure, happy to answer that. And again, it's great to be here with you doing this podcast. Well, I mean, I did go to medical school knowing I had an interest in what at the time was probably referred to as complementary and alternative medicine. Integrative didn't really exist as a term, and nor did functional medicine back then. And I was intrigued. I mean, again, without going way back into my history, I mean, I had a background in martial arts, but I was intrigued in things that came from other healing traditions. But I really was interested in trying to be a small part of a transformation of healthcare, because I wondered why we didn't integrate more of this into the conventional system. At that time, it was things like acupuncture, certainly vitamins, dietary supplements, probiotics, massage therapy, and really wanted to look at the evidence for these sorts of interventions. I thought it was really important that we do that and contribute to that evidence. So I've had, along with my clinical career, I've done a fair amount of research throughout my career. So even going to medical school, knew it was an interest, had a phenomenal opportunity right after finishing my training to start one of the earlier hospital-based integrative medicine programs for a healthcare system in New Jersey, as you've just mentioned in the intro, and really enjoyed that. In 2011, again, phenomenal opportunity to go to Duke, where I did run Duke Integrative Medicine. They have a beautiful program there. Also oversaw the Duke Diet Center and a fitness center. And that was when I would say, around that time period, 2010, 2011, I began more formal functional medicine training. And that really launched my interest in gut health and its connection to chronic diseases. Began to implement a lot of that sort of an approach, sort of focusing on the gut very often for various chronic diseases while I was at Duke. And then, as you've mentioned, I was recruited to Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. That was 2019 to build their integrative functional medicine program. Again, really enjoyed what I was doing there. I believe it was there that I gave a talk on what's called Grand Rounds Talk, which is like a talk for your colleagues within the medical center on the connection between gut health and chronic diseases. And I also gave a talk at a Mayo nutrition conference, and I think maybe that's where Colleen Cutcliffe, our CEO at Pendulum, saw me. Mayo Ventures was an early investor in Pendulum, and so she reached out to do a study for Pendulum, a repeat, larger, more robust study on one of their products called Pendulum Glucose Control. So this was a study on type 2 diabetics. And in designing that study and using their products on my patients, I really appreciated certainly the efficacy of the products in my clinical practice, but the commitment of the company to the science and what have you. And still wasn't thinking of leaving Mayo, but when the chief medical officer decided to retire, it just was a phenomenal opportunity. So as of the beginning of 2024, I jumped ship, so to speak, and have been chief medical officer at Pendulum since that time.
It's really interesting too, because you were in the bureaucratic, bigger organizations, and now you're in a entrepreneurial, not exactly a startup anymore, but it's still an early stage company. What have you found to be the differences in your working environment, your ability to get things done, your interaction with your staff and all that? How would you describe the difference between the big company and the small companies that you're in now?
I mean, again, a great question. I have spent, pretty much the majority, obviously, of my 26 now year career since I finished my training, primarily within large academic health center systems like Duke and like Mayo Clinic.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that, and I feel to a certain degree I learned to be successful, obviously, in those environments. But it does take some persistence. It takes you need to be patient, and when you're trying to do innovative things, and of course, when you're building integrative medicine programs, in a way, by definition, you're trying to be innovative within the conventional system. It takes time, without a doubt. And there are things that I can get done in, 3 days, perhaps, if not 3 minutes at Pendulum that might take me 3 months or longer at somewhere like Mayo Clinic. Again, am very proud that I was at Mayo and that I've had opportunities to be at Duke. But it has been a very different experience to be able to move a little more quickly, be a little more nimble, and bring ideas to fruition and still be on this sort of cutting edge. I mean, at Mayo, obviously, I felt, Duke as well, but it felt like we were providing certainly cutting edge conventional care. But at Pendulum, we are really sort of at the forefront of leading kind of this next great frontier of health care and our understanding of health, and as it relates to the development of diseases, which is really looking at the microbiome, looking at these next generation probiotics and how we can use them to really bring about a new sort of health reality for people that just couldn't achieve their health related goals, in the past. So that's been very exciting for me.
And have you given up seeing patients like you used to?
No, yeah, no, I didn't want to totally give that up. I mean, I love seeing patients and I love providing integrative functional medicine. And so I do have a very limited, obviously, I'm very busy with my role at Pendulum. I think one of the advantages is the company is on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast. So a couple mornings a week, I do see patients. I saw a couple of patients this morning, and that's been great to be able to keep my hand in it. I have a practice in Jacksonville that has allowed me to do that.
And have you stayed as a specialist now? Are you continuing to just say patients see you or are referred to you as now a functional medicine doctor with a microbiome expertise?
I mean, yes, that's always what I've done. So I mean, I trained as an internist, certainly trained in primary care, but just given the nature of my career, I haven't practiced as a primary care physician. I've practiced primarily as an integrative functional medicine physician, sort of consultant, and that's worked out well. But I see all kinds of things that one might imagine that we see in these sorts of practices. Certainly cancer is a part of it, chronic pain, autoimmune conditions, a lot of gut-related issues. And in functional medicine, as you're aware, and with integrative, I mean, we're interested in trying to get at root cause, certainly this integration of complementary modalities. But what I really like about the approach clinically is that it's really thinking about issues from the perspective of the biological systems and how can we correct those systems and how might those biological systems may be influencing the disease or the symptom that the patient is presenting with. And that's why so much of the focus goes on the gut, because the gut is so pivotal to so many diseases and sort of symptoms that patients may be experiencing, from joint pain to gut related issues to headaches. There may be a gut related component to that, to the condition.
European Wellness, founded by the iconic and widely published Professor Dr. Michael Chan, is the world leader in stem cell and peptide therapy, with 26 medical and aesthetic spa locations primarily in Europe and Asia. Their website, www.europeanwellness.com, details the wide range of wellness products that can be ordered using the Aegis code for a 10% discount. They will also offer our viewers discounts on medical and cosmetic services and products if they choose to visit the clinics. I have firsthand experience using their wide range of science-based stem cell and peptide products and am now a loyal customer. Go to their website, www.europeanwellness.com, for more information about this exciting company. It's so interesting, though, because the microbiome has really only become the darling of the functional medicine industry or profession, let's say, in the last few years. I mean, nobody really paid that much attention in the gut-brain axis and the microbiome as the key to longevity and health span and so forth. So you, again, as I said, you were ahead of your time. And I think, as a in the forefront of the expertise, is there anything that you can say you learned in the beginning that you would say was incorrect and would not be what you would use today in terms of the knowledge of the microbiome and how it functions in promoting our longevity?
Well, let me make a comment even before I answer your question directly, because you just noted that we've sort of had this explosion of interest in the microbiome. And part of what has allowed that to occur, or has sort of been the impetus for that, is that the technology to study the microbiome has really advanced over the last 20 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we now have technologies beyond having to grow bacteria in some petri dish like you did in, maybe high school biology, to these genome sequencing technologies, what's called something called PCR. And that's really allowed us to study the microbiome in a more detailed way, to study strains of bacteria, for example, that are anaerobic, that cannot be exposed to oxygen. So you couldn't just kind of put them on a petri dish in your lab. And that's where the discovery of some of these really next generation keystone strains that I know we're going to discuss. I mean, this is part of what Pendulum's sort of claim to fame, is bringing these strains to the marketplace. So that's what's allowed us. And even every day, I mean, I, keep up with the literature. It's like every day there's some new study or other, or multiple studies coming out that is helping us to understand, yet another connection of the gut microbiome to some sort of chronic disease or disease development or health related issue. And so that's been really exciting. Your question around, is there something that maybe I used to think that I have changed? I guess I would answer that by saying, maybe even just 4 or 5 years ago, if you said to me, as a patient, let's say, or, as a friend, should I take a colleague, should I take a probiotic?
Mm-hmm.
I might say, well, I don't know. I'm not sure if, the evidence is there for just taking a daily probiotic. But
Mm-hmm.
if you do, I think a lot of us used to just say, take something with at least 5 strains and, 30 billion units. And I don't even know where that came from exactly. I mean, I heard
Mm-hmm.
it from colleagues, they've heard it from me. And, those probiotics that historically have been on the shelves have been lactobacillus strains, bifidobacterium strains, things that I'm sure some of your audience are familiar with, or if they, looked at the labels on their probiotics. And certainly they have a role in the body. But, I think what we've come to understand now is that if you ask the question, should I take a probiotic? Then I really need to ask the question, well, what are you taking it for? And what strain, therefore, are you taking, and what is the evidence for that particular strain, for that particular indication? And so we're not fully there yet. We have a lot more to understand, but this idea to be more precise and have more sort of precision probiotics
Mm-hmm.
and know this strain has the best evidence for your particular condition,
Mm-hmm.
that's really where I think the field is moving as it relates to the whole concept of probiotics.
And how many strains are there if you had to make a
Yeah.
list?
Well, I mean, I think, again, this gets debated. People tend to say anywhere from 70 to 100 trillion bacteria in the gut. There are hundreds to thousands of strains. I mean, undoubtedly, we probably haven't characterized all the strains, but suffice it to say that it's a lot of bacteria and a lot of different types of bacteria.
Mm-hmm. So a lot to ask a patient in terms of, and they may not even know the answers, that to give you because they don't know really why do I feel so badly? I just can't pinpoint what it is. So you are really a detective when you're dealing with trying to discover the root cause of a patient's symptoms. So right, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that,
And I think it even goes beyond. I mean, I wouldn't call this necessarily a symptom. So it's symptoms, but it's things like I can't control my cravings.
yes.
I'm not sure why that is. And these things relate back directly very often to the microbiome. And this is a new insight that we've gained just over the last few years.
Did you ever feel like you were just so at a brick wall? I mean, that you just couldn't figure out what the answers were, and you were just ready to give up with limited the limited knowledge of what you had back then compared to what you might have been doing with the same patient today. Did you ever feel like just hitting a brick wall?
Actually, I don't think I ever did, to be honest with you. I mean, I think there's certainly and having practiced at places like Duke and Mayo and often, very often, the majority of the time seeing patients that have seen a number of other very bright healthcare providers
Mm-hmm.
um, and haven't gotten the answers that they've wanted. And I'm in no way implying I'm brighter than those other healthcare providers, but taking a different approach, taking a different perspective on the condition has often been helpful. But even when I couldn't get to root cause, I've always kept it in the back of my mind that there's always an opportunity to try and relieve suffering. So even
Mm-hmm.
when we can't cure, even when there's going to be some degree of ongoing chronic symptoms or whatever the case may be, which is the case more often than I wish, there's almost always the opportunity to focus on relieving suffering in some way. And so, that's something I always keep in the back of my mind, no matter who the patient is that I'm seeing or what the issue may be that I'm trying to address.
You, Adam, until recently, probiotics were always kind of an enigma because many of them you were just wasting your money. You'd spend the money to get the probiotics, but they would never survive the digestive tract, the acidity. So how is Pendulum different than these traditional? I know you're not a probiotic company, you're a microbiome scientifically based company. So I want to be clear with our audience that we're not talking about just another probiotic. We're talking about eons of knowledge and science beyond that. But going back to the roots of probiotics, where they just wouldn't survive. And I can remember so many times buying a probiotic and thinking it was doing me good, and then reading that the science behind it that probiotic couldn't even get through my digestive tract. So how does Pendulum change that and make the efficacy of the products get through, and not only the acidity but slow methylators or people who are toxic and are not absorbing? How do you get around all of that to make them work?
I think, again, a great question. I think it's probably best to answer it by starting off with a little bit of the history of the company, because you mentioned earlier, Pendulum isn't exactly a startup. I mean, the company's been around for over 10 years.
Right.
And it was founded by, PhD scientists, microbiologists, who were interested in studying this connection between the microbiome and health.
Right.
They began to study some of these, again, quote, next generation probiotics, as I mentioned earlier, primarily anaerobic strains that cannot be exposed to oxygen, and that have very profound effects on our health, in particular metabolism, but other aspects of our health. They focus down on 5 main strains, and the big strain being something called Akkermansia, which I can talk about more in a moment in terms of the science behind Akkermansia.
Right.
But once they figured out that these strains were not only critical for human health, but they wanted to try to provide access to a product to consumers, they had to figure out how to grow these anaerobic bacteria in a way that they would survive. That took about 3 years to figure out. And then, to your point, they needed to figure out how to deliver these bacteria to the distal intestine, to the large intestine, the colon, basically, the distal part of your GI tract, because that's where these anaerobic bacteria live, in the colon, where there isn't oxygen.
Right.
And so they worked through this manufacturing process, actually built a plant in San Francisco to manufacture the products, and also utilized this vegetable-based, acid-resistant, delayed release capsule to allow the bacteria to make it through, as you've already said, make it through that acidic environment of the stomach and get all the way down to the large intestine, where they get released and kind of work their magic.
And what about the slow methylators and the toxic people? How do you get around that too?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't use the expression "get around it," because it really is a part of an overall approach.
Right.
I wouldn't say that you can take almost any pill and just ignore all the other aspects of lifestyle and expect that you're going to get the results that you need. So very often, if someone is, dealing with, at least in my clinical practice, if they are kind of quote unquote toxic, as you're describing, or may have issues with methylation, it's really a comprehensive plan. And I'm often starting by looking at diet and what we need to do to enhance their diet and lifestyle overall. And then looking at how we may integrate appropriate probiotics as a piece of that overall plan. And so, I've never say, just take a pill and everything's going to get better. But for many people, it's a missing piece because they haven't thought that the gut microbiome may be a key component of what they're dealing with.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the specifics. If people who are watching today have never heard of Akkermansia, that's your like flagship product. Let's take a deep dive and tell us, as if we're kindergarten level, tell us what Akkermansia is and what it does and how it's going to improve our overall health.
Sure, I'd love to. So we can say it different ways. I say Akkermansia, but I've heard people say Akkermansia. The full name for the strain that we have is Akkermansia mucinophilia, which really means kind of mucin loving. So I'll talk about that. There are 2 main roles that Akkermansia plays. Many roles, but 2 main roles maybe that I'll focus on. I mean, because there's roles within aging, all kinds of things that and influences on the immune system. But just for the moment, let me focus on 2, and that is the influence on metabolic health, and specifically the release of a hormone that many of your listeners are probably familiar with, called GLP-1, which many people are injecting into themselves to help with weight loss and diabetes. And so there's the metabolic side, and then there's this role in helping to maintain the integrity, the health of the lining of the gut. So first, on the metabolic side, the GLP-1 side. So it turns out that when we eat a meal, specific strains of bacteria in our gut, in this case, Akkermansia, eat that meal. They eat the fiber within that meal, and they release signaling molecules. And those molecules then tell cells within the lining of the gut to release this unhunger hormone, GLP-1.
Yeah.
And GLP-1 gets released into the blood. It goes to the pancreas and it tells the pancreas, this person just ate, release insulin so their blood sugar doesn't go too high.
Mm-hmm.
It goes to their gut and slows down digestion so that you can absorb the foods that you're eating and feel a little more full. And it travels up to the brain, to the hippocampus, and says, okay, let's stop this person from eating, let them feel hungry. Kind of like when you go to the gas station to fill up your gas tank, if you don't drive an EV, you sort of plug it in and you click the little thing and you can hands-free, and somehow magically that gas pump knows when your tank is full and it clicks off. And GLP-1 is really the hormone that, amongst others, it kind of tells you to stop eating because you're full. All of that happens with Akkermansia, amongst other strains, as the middleman, okay, signaling the body to make GLP-1 because someone has just eaten a meal. So it's a very important bacteria as it relates to maintaining a healthy weight, as it relates to maintaining cravings, as it relates and not having a problem with cravings. It's very important as it relates to sort of energy metabolism and utilizing foods and turning them into energy appropriately without things like your sugar going too high. So that's one very important component. And the other really is to maintain this health of the gut lining. And so let me make sure I can explain this, for your audience. If we think of the gut as and maybe describe it the way our CEO at Pendulum, Colleen, likes to describe it, as sort of a fence similar to what she has in her backyard. If we can imagine the boards sort of line up, okay? And you want those boards tight together so things can't get through. Now, in the case of our gut, there are mechanisms that allow things that should get through to get through, but you want to keep out the things that shouldn't, and then you want to let in only the thing, keep out foe and let in friend. And so we want those boards tight together. But also on the outside of that fence, there's sort of a shellac. And in the case of our gut, that shellac is called mucin.
Correct.
It acts kind of like a flypaper. So it also helps to trap things that may be, trying to get into our bloodstream. They're going to trigger our immune system, trigger inflammation. And one of the things that Akkermansia mucinophilia, mucin-loving Akkermansia, does is almost like a Pac-Man. It sort of eats up old mucin and it stimulates other cells in the gut to actually make new mucin, fresh mucin, so you keep that gut lining healthy. And that is so important for so many aspects of our health, including aging, because you've probably talked about this on your podcast, but this concept of inflammaging and how certain components of aging are really related to certainly our immune system and an upregulation of inflammation and chronic inflammation. And when the gut is leaky, or if I want to sound more like a doctor, we have increased intestinal permeability, but most people know that as leaky gut. That typically is going to contribute to this upregulation of the immune system, upregulation of inflammation, which can contribute to the development of all kinds of diseases and certainly further the kind of unhealthy aging process that we want to try to avoid.
And where does LPS come in?
Yeah. So LPS, lipopolysaccharides, those are one of the types of molecules, let's say, that can leak into the gut in large amounts when that integrity, that health of that gut lining isn't what it should be. So when the LPSs get into the bloodstream, the immune system comes over and says, what's this? This isn't supposed to be here. that triggers sort of a turning on, an upregulation of the immune system, a release of immune cells, which by and large are pro-inflammatory cells. So when we're leaking a lot of LPSs into the bloodstream, we are potentially chronically upregulating the immune system and by extension, inflammation.
So how does a person who suspects that they may have leaky gut or some other microbiome condition, negative condition, how do they get the best testing to know exactly what's going on?
Yeah, I mean that's a tricky question, and certainly as it relates to our microbiome, there are a number of labs out there that offer testing. The science can vary a little bit in terms of how they actually do that testing, but they look often at the microbiome itself. They look at sort of stool chemistry. So, we're talking about things that you might find in someone's poop, so to speak, but that may give a sign as to whether or not there are some issues going on. There's a lot of information that we get from those tests, and some of that information can be very actionable, and sometimes we're not quite sure what to do with that information because it's only a snapshot in time. We don't really know what a healthy microbiome is for you exactly compared to me. There's a lot of variability around that, but often it can give you information that can be helpful. There are some tests out there for leaky gut. I will say that the science behind many of those tests is not rock solid, and we do need to sort of strengthen our understanding of how we can test for leaky gut. At Mayo Clinic, they actually have a scope, however, that they use only for research purposes, and that scope can actually see increased intestinal permeability in real time. So that certainly is a way, but it's not, clinically available. But it is something that I often mention because I think there are still people out there, maybe even healthcare providers out there that think, leaky gut doesn't exist. And it certainly does, and it's well understood. And there are, probably thousands of articles out there now describing this concept of increased intestinal permeability, another medical word, endotoxemia, really a fancy medical word for leaking toxins from the gut into the bloodstream. And these are all different ways of talking about, this concept of leaky gut. In my clinical practice, I'll just say that I typically assume it's there. It's kind of when the symptoms are there and, you kind of assume that there probably is a component of leaky gut going on because it is hard to test.
And so many people are averse to doing a stool test. So I was just wondering if there's been any science and any technology that has advanced from having to go through the stool test to getting as efficacious results using the blood or like KBMO. I don't know if you know them. Dr. James White, he's actually right there in where you and I grew up in Boston area, but it's KBMO, and James White is the CEO. But they do a prick of the finger, and they then give you, after a week or so, they send you the test results. Can that possibly, and I don't want to, demean them in any way, but I think a lot of people like you who are so immersed in this would question whether you can really get the same kind of knowledge and information from doing that as you do from a stool test. So just curious to know what your thoughts are.
Well, in a general sense, the technology is certainly advancing and it's very exciting. Again, without taking a deep dive, I've heard of KBMO, but without taking a deep dive into the science, I don't want to comment one way or another just because I don't know enough specifically about their science.
Yeah, it wasn't a comment about them, but about the concept of using blood versus the stool.
I mean, I would imagine in the long run, there are things we'll be able to tell from the blood. I don't think the science is close, as far as I understand, to be able to really characterize the microbiome from some sort of finger stick. And I think it behooves us all to keep our eye on the science and how it's advancing. But I think that it's also important to really allow the science to be truly validated before we start to use it to make important healthcare decisions.
And you've been doing this for a long time, so you've seen that advancement. But I don't totally agree with you that sometimes you get these, let's just say you take a stool test and you get all these results that could be really complicate because there's so much information that you might miss the bullseye in terms of what is really the cause instead of having all these potential influences that aren't really making that huge difference. But the information is so voluminous that you can misread. I guess it's just like getting false positives, and well, you know what I'm saying, and like what I'm not asking you to comment on that because it's obviously a truth, and it just is going to, it's going to exist for a while until there's some easy way for us to get the information without all the confusion of potential confusion. But then, what about candida and yeast infections, which so many people complain, they've gotten one strain or another. I think there's 3 strains, right, of candida possibility, like the
Yeah,
yeah.
there are multiple strains, and I think, there's another example where most of the stool testing can certainly see if there are elevated levels. And there are treatments. Very often, though, for a practice like mine, if we're concerned about those sorts of issues or candida specifically, we try to start with adjusting diet
Yeah.
and looking at the microbiome potentially, or thinking about the microbiome and where there may be imbalances and how we might help to restore a balance to that ecosystem.
Hmm.
So that's always an important consideration.
Yeah, so that diet would obviously, the first and foremost is get rid of sugar, right? That I think that goes for all of what we're talking about. That sugar is the big enemy of the health of the microbiome and the health of the person overall. So, and then processed food, which is the SAD diet, this standard American diet, which fortunately you and I are lucky enough to have known a long time ago to not shop in the middle of the grocery store, to always only go to the aisles and where the protein and the vegetables and fruit are. And I guess in some candida diets you're not supposed to eat certain fruits because they're heavy in sugar, like bananas, I guess would be one. But anyway, before we get into nutrition, which I do want you to talk about a little bit, but I had a couple of other questions because I don't want to lose the Akkermansia and the butyrate and then the tributyrate, because I was reading about that and I didn't know the difference. What is the difference between butyrate and tributyrate?
Well, so let me again maybe step back and say that if we think about this from the perspective of the 5 strains that, let's say, Pendulum has brought to the market, right? And so the first product that Pendulum released was called Pendulum Glucose Control. And
Right.
what's interesting about that is it has, I'm sorry?
That was the study that you worked on with.
I didn't, that's correct. The follow-up study. So there was an original study that was published in the and the BMJ, British Medical Journal, and that was a clinical trial, randomized clinical trial that looked at the use of this 5-strain formulation in people with type 2 diabetes who are actually on treatments like metformin, and showed that in individuals with clear signs of metabolic dysfunction, including, in this case, type 2 diabetes, that there were clinically significant, statistically and clinically significant improvements in glucose control. So glucose spikes is something we measure on continuous glucose monitors, decreased by 33%. And
Oh.
then again, any of your audience that is familiar with diabetes will know one of the main things we monitor is something called hemoglobin A1C. It's
Mhm.
just a blood test that we monitor for diabetes control. And there
Right.
was actually a 0.6 improvement in hemoglobin A1C in
Hmm.
diabetics. And so that's with the Pendulum Glucose Control product. So that product has 5 strains. It has Akkermansia, and
Hmm.
then it's got 3 primary butyrate producers. I mean, I could list them all off for you, but the 3 different sort of Clostridium strains, Butyricum, Butyrichii, Enterobutyricum hallei, these all make short chain fatty acids. Butyrate is a short chain fatty acid. Don't want to get too technical here, and then there's a 5th strain, which is called Bifidobacterium infantis, which the pediatricians know a lot about. It's very important in those first few years of life, but it continues to maintain a role later in life. And that's what's often referred to as a primary fermenter. So it sort of helps to support other bacterial strains.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way bacteria work is, it's kind of like a city. You
Mm-hmm.
know, everyone has different jobs and there's some overlap. So,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe the example might be the police. I mean, you might have a sheriff's office, you might have the state police, there's the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
there's not just one division that deals with legal. So, there's an overlap there. And it's the same thing with the gut. There's an overlap of effort. There's also bad players, just like you might find in any city or any community. And, everyone's trying to keep each other in check. And so these 5 strains really work synergistically.
Mm-hmm.
But, to your point with butyrate being so important, um, and the way they work together, what the company was able to do was sort of through our research is to put together a 3-strain formulation. So that's the newest strain, the newest product that we've brought to market, which is called GLP-1 probiotic.
Mm-hmm.
That specifically has Akkermansia. It has the Clostridium butyricum, and it has the Bifidobacterium infantis.
Mm-hmm.
And those 3 strains, again, work synergistically. They work together. Interestingly, we actually studied that formulation and showed this significant decrease in cravings, which was really, really interesting. I can talk about that research, certainly in a moment, but
Mm-hmm.
really interesting stuff there.
Well, so I am going to ask you about the decrease in cravings, but I also wanted to mention the polyphenols and how important they are, and also synergistic with the impact of the Akkermansia. At some point, I'm going to say it right, but the point is with most people don't understand that GLP-1 that they're injecting to lose weight or control metabolic health is synthetic, and there are side effects, and there have many been reported. Whereas your product is completely natural and will not produce the side effects that have been associated with the injections of GLP-1. Am I correct on that?
Well, this goes back to what I was saying really at the beginning of our conversation today, and this interest in how do we work at the level of the biological system? How do
Yep.
we, how do we work to help those biological systems to work the way they're supposed to? And so, yes, you can inject synthetic GLP-1. It's not the way the body naturally utilizes GLP-1, just this injection periodically. What the body does, as I've already explained, is really release GLP-1 as it should in response to a meal. But there are so many things that people could do
Instead.
inadvertently or on purpose without recognizing that they are having a negative effect on their microbiome, from a poor diet, of course,
Yeah.
to medications that they may or may not need to take,
Yeah.
to stress, to things that you don't have control over, like whether you're pre or postmenopausal, or if you've just traveled through a few time zones and there's a change in your influence on your circadian rhythms. All of this can have traumatic brain injuries. All of this can have an influence on our gut health. So it's not unusual that we don't have the right mix of bacteria, and therefore that biological system isn't working the way that it should. And what we're doing when we're giving these specific strains of probiotics is really working at that level of the biological system to get it to function the way it should, so that your cravings don't spike, so that you're able to manage your blood sugar, you're able to sort of manage your energy levels better and metabolize things the way that you should. And you
And,
mentioned polyphenols, so I mean, I can just
yeah.
transition. So Pendulum actually has 5 products that they have Pendulum glucose control. They have
Yeah.
something called Pendulum Metabolic Daily that really is sort of a good daily one to take. I like that for people who are really trying to manage their energy levels and energy metabolism, and sort of their metabolism rather. The GLP-1 probiotic that I just mentioned that we've really studied. We're doing a large clinical trial now, but in the early work that we did with consumers, that's the one with cravings that I can talk about in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
You can certainly purchase Akkermansia by itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do have the polyphenol product. And what we did there is we were interested in providing products that would support not only probiotics, but the specific strains of probiotic, that we're discussing today and that obviously are within the Pendulum products. And so we actually studied what type of polyphenols are most effective, most supportive.
Mhm.
And it turns out that they're polyphenols from pomegranate, green tea, and grapeseed. So that's the fifth product is this polyphenol product that,
Right.
if someone says to me, well, what can I do to help the efficacy of these products? I certainly say, eat a healthy diet, plenty of fiber, polyphenols through your diet, but it can be difficult for people. We're traveling, we may not always have access to enough fruits and vegetables. I mean, polyphenols are often the things that give our vegetables and fruits color. And sometimes it can be tough to eat a rainbow. And
Right.
so when that's the case, we can always supplement with the polyphenols and support the efficacy of these bacteria.
I take, I just full transparency that good old Adam sent me to try the two products. So he just mentioned the GLP-1 and the polyphenols, and I take them together. At the beginning, Adam, I didn't know. I always thought you're supposed to take probiotics on an empty stomach, and then I listened to you, and I guess I didn't read it on the bottle or something, but now I only take them with food, and usually because I don't eat until my first meal is usually like you around 11 a.m. So I usually take them back with my first meal now. But gosh, for the first 2 weeks that I had them, I was taking them right away when I woke up with my empty stomach vitamins. So was I ever getting any efficacy on those when I took them on an empty stomach?
Oh, you certainly were. Again, as I explained earlier, they are in this vegetarian, acid-resistant, delayed release capsule.
Yeah, enteric.
However, like many of our pills and certainly many of the vitamins that people take, when you do take them with food, there's some additional benefit in terms of helping to get through the stomach and and
Yeah,
and that kind of a thing. So I get asked this all the time. Just the other day, literally yesterday, someone said, well, what's the best time to take them? And do I
yeah,
need to take them with food? And I said, it's better to take them with food, but the best time to take them is the time you're going to remember to take
right.
them, and so
Exactly. Just don't
it,
forget.
it right. It's
I
better to take them
I
without if
I cannot forget because they are so vital to everything else you do. They're like the foundation. Just like when we're talking about the health of the whole body, the microbiome is the foundational influence to everything else that you're going to build on. So it's like I'm a real estate developer. I always look at metaphors, and to me, they're like the concrete of the foundation of a home that you're starting to build. And so, yeah, it's just impossible to forget something that's that important. You couldn't build a house without a foundation. So you'd be throwing away all the other products that you're using if you don't get to the healthy microbiome first. And I guess the other question I was wondering about, I mean, I have for you is how do you know when your microbiome is working perfectly?
well, I might have to turn that question around a little bit, right? Because I would say if you're feeling good and your metabolic health is good and, overall the other things that we look at within, health and prevention of disease is seems to be in the right place, one might make an assumption that amongst other things you're doing right, your microbiome is being fed properly and probably in pretty good shape. That doesn't mean that we don't sometimes want to supplement just to make sure that we help to maintain that health, and that's in this case the health of the microbiome. But it's really the other way around, which is how might we suspect there's an issue with our microbiome? And again, that's when I go back to, are you having issues with metabolic health? Is your sugars running a little bit high? Are you having issues with craving? Are you having fatigue, brain fog, all kinds of issues? Now we're starting to understand the gut-brain connection, and how the microbiome is influencing things like how we're feeling emotionally. Are we feeling somewhat depressed? Are we feeling anxious? Those are the kind of symptoms and conditions that may indicate that part of the issue may exist within that microbiome. And again, things like the microbiome makes 90% of the serotonin, or the gut, pardon me, the gut rather, makes 90% of the serotonin for the body, this
Yep.
important neurotransmitter that influences how we feel emotionally. Many
Right.
people don't realize that. And so when there's disruptions of the gut, when there's disruptions of the microbiome specifically,
Yeah.
It can influence how we're feeling physically. It can influence how we're feeling emotionally, and certainly can influence our physiologic health, things like our glucose and other aspects of
Uh,
our
e-
physiologic.
even your blood pressure.
Without a doubt. So blood pressure is a part of that whole metabolic health, scenario. Cholesterol, triglycerides, these sorts of things all are part of the concept of metabolic health and trying to be healthy from a metabolic perspective. And the problem is that I think it's 1 in 3 adults have, metabolic dysfunction, metabolic syndrome, and it's upwards of 88 to 90% of Americans have some sign of metabolic dysfunction. And why? Because look around, right? By and large, we're not eating what we should be eating. And even if we are trying to eat right, there's other things we may be getting exposed to, toxins, etc. And so it's difficult. It's difficult to live that pristine life in our current sort of environment. And we all should do what we can to maintain our health and maintain the health of our microbiome. And certainly the pillars are eating right and exercising and managing stress and getting sleep and having healthy relationships.
Yeah.
But because there's so many factors that make it difficult for us, to make all the right choices and not get exposed to things which are in the environment. For
Mm-hmm.
many of us, it is important that we also supplement. In this
Mm-hmm.
case, right, probiotics if we're concerned about microbiome health and metabolic health and cravings and the things that we've been discussing.
So before we get into the cravings, I just wanted to say that I did have Dr. Elizabeth Yurth, who's a Boulder Longevity Institute doctor, very, very well, highly regarded, and just an amazing human being. So she said that what she does is she micro doses with GLP-1 agonists with the injection. I mean, she's an athlete, and she's always, obviously looking to manage her metabolic health and her athletic health as a result, of course, and her weight, which is, everybody seems to be concerned about that because there's so many temptations in our environment, and people who are really disciplined like we are, we still have those moments, and that's where these cravings come in, which we'll talk about in a second. But anyway, so what do you think about microdosing, and could you combine that with your products, or is that too much over the top to use GLP-1 injections along with the GLP-1 probiotic and the polyphenols, that the combination that I've been using that you sent me? Is that something that would make a difference, or is it too much?
So a few comments there. First, I want to be very clear that our products and certainly the GLP-1 probiotic, they're not in the same class. They're not medications. They're not in the same class as these
Correct.
GLP-1 analog drugs, right? They're not a replacement for those drugs. So just to be very clear.
Right.
I've certainly heard of the microdosing. I haven't had any patients that have actually utilized it, so I don't have much firsthand experience with it. I know it is something that people are doing. Similarly, we don't officially recommend or recommend against taking the probiotics with the medications or in a microdosing sort of scenario. The truth is we haven't studied it. And so I always like to comment from what I understand from the science. We don't have a lot of science here. What I can tell you is we're actually in the middle of an athlete study with one of our products. And so we are very interested in the use of these probiotics in athletes, amongst other things. Very often, depending on your degree of exercise, certainly extremes of exercise, like running and ultra marathons, as I may have mentioned earlier, lead to things like leaky gut or increased
Yeah.
endotoxemia. There can be mood issues in athletes that can be related, it's felt, to disturbances in the gut that is influenced by certainly significant exercise. And so this whole gut kind of exercise connection is important and something we're interested in. And as I've said, we're studying.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because, as I mentioned to you, we're one of our platforms is Muscle and Fitness, and they only in the last 2 years has this magazine that's been known for a century. I mean, this is the Joe Reader and Arnold Schwarzenegger and that whole, and I think they have like 1 billion subscribers to the magazine. However, they never went digital until 2 years ago, and Dr. Bob Goldman, who's the co-founder of the American Academy of Anti-Aging, getting involved with them. And so I was lucky enough as a podcast host that he had been on my podcast. I've known him for many years. And he called me and he said, we're doing only 20 inaugural podcasts on our digital site. It's just going live. And this was, I think, maybe not even 2 years, a year and a half ago. So because we have this big demographic and even psychographic of athletes on Ageless and Timeless, I always want to steer a conversation towards what's best for athletes. And so the fact that you're doing this study, I really want to know what happens when you're done with the study, if you wouldn't mind, so I could then add that to our show notes for this podcast, or if it's done in, next year, 2025 or 2026, we'll have you back on to go over that. But this is really, really important stuff that we're, really, highly interested in knowing the results of that study. And then also, muscle loss is such a big issue that I hear all the time, side effects of people who are using the injectable synthetic form of the Mounjaro or Ozempic or Wegovy, or all these the ones that are. I think there's a new one now called Terpenzazide or something like that people are saying is the hottest new one. But all of these are synthetic, and they're all injectable, and they're all have side effects. However, there are people that have been thrilled with the results, and look at Oprah Winfrey as an example, and the people who have lost so much weight and improved their diet, their type 2 diabetes as well. So I would never, diminish the impact that they've had. I think they're one of the greatest potential achievements in modern medicine, that if people do it correctly and they exercise, because the muscle loss is real. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I remember when they first came out, I called my doctor, who is a functional medicine practitioner, and I said, "Oh, I'd love to take this, and would you allow me?" And she said, "Absolutely no." She said, "You're already so muscular, and why would you ever want to play with that? Because you do work out, you've always been an athlete. And don't tamper with what's good, just to lose 5 pounds." Because, I don't know too many women that wouldn't want to lose at least 5 pounds. And so I put myself in that category. So anyway, she said absolutely no. And I don't I don't take any pharmaceutical drugs anyway. So I am, purist in that regard. But when I, of course, heard of, I think I told you the story, I was at A4M and Pendulum was one of the exhibitors. I went up to the booth, was mobbed. And when I went up there and they said, here's a bottle of one of our products. At that time, they were giving away the Akamencia, just singular bottle. So that's how I first knew about you. And of course, I loved it that Colleen, the CEO, was a woman, and I read her background, and I will have her on at one point. But so long story, one way to say that, there are side effects, and so happy that you have the GLP-1 probiotic combined with the polyphenols, which I think is so much healthier, because it's not just as you said, it's not a drug. And so I just want people to know about before, because I just got flashed, and I know we were going to talk about the cravings issue, but those products will help you with cravings. I don't seem to have too many cravings. I do love dark chocolate, which is a good craving. And, but I'm not one of those people that, has issues with overeating out of stress, or in fact, I usually would go the other way. So I feel really lucky that these products are more to over the top help, and know that they're, that they're just going to improve what might already be in very good shape. But not everybody is in that camp. And the good thing is it doesn't affect your muscles at all, only to help you, because it actually helps. When it helps to diminish your appetite, it also helps you to increase your energy level. You would think if you were starving yourself, like sometimes with intermittent fasting, if you fast too long, you are getting muscle wasting. But with these products that you have with Pendulum, that doesn't happen. So anyway, before we have to go, I just want you to tell us about the cravings really quickly and how this will scientifically, how your products affect the cravings.
Yeah, quickly then, we did a study with consumers, and we this was on the GLP-1 probiotic product, and they started taking the product, and we measured their cravings at baseline with this validated questionnaire that looks at cravings, and then at 6 weeks, and what we found was that 91% of people taking the GLP-1 probiotic had a significant reduction in cravings. Interestingly, if they had higher cravings at baseline, they tended to see a greater reduction. And this questionnaire actually looks at cravings in 4 different areas, and all of those areas had significant reductions. It was sugars, it was starches, it was high-fat foods, and it was high-fat fast foods. Actually looks at fast foods as well. And so within every one of those areas, there were significant reductions in cravings. So we're now sort of using that info, but as I've said earlier, we're actually doing a much more robust clinical trial and looking at all kinds of outcomes. So as you've said, I mean, not only with the athlete study, but with all of our research, first of all, we intend to publish, but second of all, I'd love to come back on and discuss all those findings. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really one of the main reasons I went to the company, beyond I was seeing so much efficacy in my clinical practice,
Yeah.
was the commitment to the research, because half of my job is doing this, but
Mm-hmm.
the other half, or even the majority of it, is overseeing our clinical research, and we have all kinds of studies going on that we're supporting and
Right.
sponsoring. So it's exciting.
Right. Well, if our CEO is listening, I hope he'll flash your website on the screen, because I did want people to know that you've so generously offered our viewers a 20% discount. So you'd have to go to Pendulum Life, right? pendulumlife.com.
.com. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And type in ageless. Adam has already set up a code for us. And that's it, right? That's all you have to do that's your coupon code, and you get 20% off of your products.
Yeah, 20% off of I think your first membership order or something like that. So, but it is 20%. And we also have a lot more information on the pendulumlife.com website.
Yes.
A lot of our science is there, even information on clinical trials that we're involved in,
Yeah.
and some protocols for healthcare providers and others, things
Yeah.
like that. But if people are interested, they can go to that website, and as you've said, use the code ageless
Very
and try it for themselves.
well, Adam. I knew that we could talk forever, because we just have that chemistry, and I love the energy between us, and I love that you've been so much of a front runner in health span and lifespan, and knowing so early on in your career, when you were really just a med school graduate, that you were going to focus on something that was really just beginning to burgeon, and has now grown into a full on, I guess you would call it validated discipline, which is, this functional integrative medicine. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Oh, thank you. You as well. And thank you for doing this kind of a podcast. It's so important to get people sort of reliable information that they can use to make their healthcare decisions. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
And I couldn't do it without people like you. So I feel very honored. So thank you so much, Adam. Take care.
You as well.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.